January was a disastrous transfer window. We signed absolutely nobody, and there are a lot of questions that need answering. No doubt the futures of Jarboe and Declan Rice are in danger, and we can probably expect to see them leave in the summer. And won't blame them at this point. With a lack of signings, demonstrates there's a lack of ambition. So, who do you think that boils down to? The board? David Moyes? Who do you think? Well, David Moyes is someone who you'd think would get the blame. And he's actually come out and done an interview to talk about the transfer window and how the team's gotten on at the halfway stage of the season. Starts off this interview by saying that he's glad that everyone's back. He's glad that Ben Rama is back and that other people are in training. He says that the squad's in great spirits. And then the interviewer decides to ask about Monday, i.e. transfer deadline day. Here's what Moyes says. He says, quote, "It was a late night. I would have loved to have said we'd got everything done and dusted early doors, but look, it wasn't for the want of trying, that's for sure. I did half of a communications degree at university before I transferred to do broadcasting at another post-secondary institution. And I actually understand a little bit about human interaction and the body. We learned a little bit of analysing body language and analysing words. And there are certain triggers in this particular response that I want to go through in this video. He says, I would have loved to have said we got everything undone, dusted early doors, but look, it wasn't for the want of trying, that's for sure. How he structures that sentence alone rung a few alarm bells in my head. He says, but look, it wasn't. Look is a filler. That is a word that he uses to allow his mind to think of what next to say. And he can do so within about 5 seconds. It wasn't for the want of trying, that's for sure. That's for sure is a weak attempt at him maybe trying to reinforce that the board tried to be ambitious, even though we know that this might not have been the case. It's a false positive. West Ham supporters can be reassured that we were really ambitious in what we're trying to do. We were really ambitious in trying to get in good players who can help us and make a difference. That strikes me. We were really ambitious. West Ham's supposed to be an ambitious club right now, so why is he talking in the past tense? Is he saying that the club was ambitious and it's not anymore? One thing's going to lead to the next, and I'll give my final thoughts towards the end of the video as to why that's relevant. He says next, we've also got Jared Bowen, and it would be very difficult to get a better backup to Miki Antonio than Jared. We were always trying to look and find replacements in several areas, again, talking in the past tense, but it just became pretty difficult in the end, and we missed out on one or two late on. Overall, all I can say is that the board have been fantastic. This is where he then changes topic and starts to show praise towards the owners. He hasn't mentioned at this point that where he wanted to sign players. He hasn't mentioned at this point that he desperately wanted new faces. He says, we probably made 3 record bids from the club in this January window, and let's be fair, January is never really a great time. Isn't that what David Sullivan's been saying for the past 6 or so years about January windows? Hasn't he come out and said things like that? Hasn't Brady come out and said things like that? I think you'll find that it's always the same excuse. And when David Moyes says this, it's an attempt to paper over the cracks of what the board are saying. In other ways, it's partly trying to deflect the blame without actually stating the person that he blames, if that makes sense. He's saying the board have been fantastic. He can't criticise them openly because they're the ones employing him. And January is never really a great time. This starts off the last chunk of this paragraph, that things start to get even more interesting yet concerning. He says, and I quote, we've been quite good in January in the main. In the last few Januaries, we've been here, we've signed players and sort of done quite well. But this one, for some reason, became tougher. It's not a very confident response. He repeats the word January twice in that, saying we've been quite good in January in the main. Didn't have a problem with that part because we have. The last few Januaries we've been here, we've signed players and have sort of done quite well. That is an understatement because we've signed players in January and they've done really well. Souček, Bowen and Lingard did really well when they signed in January. Sort of done quite well is like putting down the work that he did to sign those players in January. So it's a bit of a put down. And maybe that's reflecting what the board thinks. Because they had to spend that money on those players. And probably only did it as a knee-jerk reaction. Sort of done quite well. As well, isn't really correct English and grammar. And we have done have somewhat done quite well with it, but sort of done quite well doesn't really make sense. But this one, for some reason, became tougher. For some reason. He doesn't really give a clear answer at this point. The next sentence, he tries to justify this. I also believe it's probably been tougher because we're looking at a much different level of player now and trying to attract some of the top players throughout Europe. That is a 50-50. That emits something that's half and half, in my opinion. Let me explain what it means. He's saying trying to attract some of the top players throughout Europe because it's got connotations with West Ham's league position and West Ham's ambition to try and get into Europe again, as Moyes has talked about before. I believe it's been tougher because we're looking at a much different level of player now. That could actually be interpreted as him trying to send a message to the board saying that if we want to move forward, we've got to get better players in. We've got to progress. We can't be average all over the place. But looking at a much different level of player is something that he's talking about and trying to say, I want to get these players in to improve the squad, but I've been limited by that. So overall, he never really makes a clear stance as to what went wrong in the window. He doesn't really get into this blame game because he partly can't, but he never really fully accepts responsibility. He tries to justify it in a way by talking about what the board would want to hear. He says, in the next answer to, you're not playing a video game, you're just using real money and a lot of it. I think it's one thing I want to do is to make sure that the supporters of West Ham can trust that I'm trying to spend the money wisely and we're trying to bring in good players, but also we don't want to bring in people who I think are only here just to pad it up and maybe makes everyone in the media think that we've done a bit of good business. That's called a run-on sentence. And a run-on sentence doesn't tend to have grammar, it's all compiled together. He is just trying to add bits and bits and bits in there. And I'm trying to spend the money wisely. I don't doubt that. We're trying to bring in good players. Don't doubt that. He says, but indicates the negation. We don't want to bring in people who I think are only here just to pad it up. And made the media think that we've done a bit of good business. So he's trying to say that he'd rather sign nobody at all if they're going to be useless rather than sign actual players. And this is actually a rather honest answer. Because I can believe this. I wouldn't want him spending the board's money, if they do give him any, on rubbish. I wouldn't want him settling for second best crappy board signings. So this answer actually is quite believable. And he's trying to be a bit more honest about why he didn't do business and saying that he just wants to sign good players. But when he tends to say words such as good players and ambitious, he tends to say them at slightly less volume than the rest of his sentence. So it's like, you know, the club's been ambitious and the club were trying to sign good players. Pauses slightly before he says the words, and he has done this in interviews. He says, you know, we're looking for, you know, the right players. Moyes tends to use fillers a lot when he tries to talk about transfers and quite delicate topics that the fans have been known to get on the owners' backs for. He's using these fillers because it allows him to mentally create a dialogue. Those 5 seconds could allow him to create another sentence, or allow him to create another part of the paragraph in his head, which he did in the first response where he says, I would have loved to have said that we got everything done and dusted early doors, but look, that's the filler. It wasn't for the want of trying. That's for sure. That's for sure is a weak attempt to try and reassure fans that the club did kind of try, even though they didn't. And that's the excuse, we tried. I'll conclude this by saying, what Moyes is saying is to try and make sympathies with the board while also trying to cover for himself. It's not for a want of sitting on the fence. It's a one of trying to make both sides happy as well. And he's saying here, it would be very difficult to get a backup to Antonio than Jared Bowen, indicating that the club's going to have to be self-reliant, even though he probably did not want that. And he tends to cover over the tracks by doing what Sullivan would want him to, saying that we made record bids that were way off, saying that we've been good in January in the past, and actually trying to put down his own work. He's saying we've sort of done quite well. We've done really well in January windows. Just look at the statistics from January players that Moyes signed. And the board saying we've sort of done quite well, I think, without really understanding the full ambition. It comes back down to ambition. Moyes talks about it a lot, but he doesn't really understand how to implement it. He's a great manager, though. I have full trust in him and full trust in the starting 11. I do like David Moyes a lot. But there were some things about this interview that kind of didn't give off very positive signals. And that's why I wanted to touch on it on this. He seems to have made excuses that the board would support. And it seems like there's no definite answer as to why he's not signed players. He's just saying that he'll go for it in the summer because it's easier than giving his real thoughts out. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like the video, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more content. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you all soon.